people remember that as peacetime, like all the 1990s was one big Seinfeld episode or something like that. But no, actually stop and think about it. America, Britain, and Saudi supported these terrorists. And then they also supported unmitigated violence against their co-religionists in various places, including, again, bombing Iraq from Saudi Arabia and supporting Israel's unmitigated violence against the Palestinians and the Lebanese all through the 1990s. That was the motivation for al-Qaeda's war against us. That's obviously the motive for the attack on the beach the other day. And then all Netanyahu can say, this ought to sound just pathetic. This ought to just sound ridiculous in your ears. He goes, well, this is just anti-Semitism. I mean, look, obviously this guy, again, killed innocent people because they were Jewish. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it was a political attack. It wasn't just based on like some irrational, ancient cultural hatred of Jews. It's what Israel has been doing to people.
Hey, welcome back to the show. And today is of course a returning guest, Scott Horton, director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and the author of several acclaimed books. He's also the host of the Scott Horton Show. Scott, how you been? Happy holidays.
I'm doing great. You too. How are you?
Just dandy, just doing the show more and more and expanding my awareness of things. And it's actually had a rather profound impact on how I look at things. And so, which I guess I shouldn't be surprised given some of the conversations, but great to have you back on today.
Life too, man.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think about too is had I not even attempted to do the show, and what do they say? At least I think in Silicon Valley, fail fast, fail forward. Had I not, attempted this, I'd be completely blind to a lot of things, candidly. So I'm grateful for that, and then also wanted to give the shout out to your book. I wanted to show this to the audience. Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. So I encourage everybody tuning in to pick up Scott's book. And that being said, I figured if we could start off, if you could provide your rendering of where things are shaking out today in the world and what you feel is most, pertinent to the audience.
Well, I mean, the big emergency today is that it seems that Trump is going to, I don't know exactly what, maybe it'll be obsolete by the time I say this and I'll look foolish, but the rumors are that he's going to essentially declare war against Venezuela. He has put a full blockade on the entire country, banned all, civilian or foreign air traffic from their airspace, and have a full naval blockade, they claim, although there are Russian ships sailing in and out of there, or there were. I don't know what's the latest status of that. That's probably the most important thing to be watching. And with no real pretext at all. Even Trump's own chief of staff, Susie Wiles, in her scandalous interview there with Vanity Fair, said that, drugs is just a pretext. It has nothing to do with drugs. And striking those boats is not about drugs. It's just about putting pressure on Maduro. So this is like Bill Clinton in Kosovo, George W. Bush in Iraq, Barack Obama in Libya level, just lying us into war. Just the most phony pretext when we have no real casus belli whatsoever, no reason in the world for America to attack this country. And I don't know exactly what, I guess Trump is going to threaten Maduro that he better step down or else. And then, or else what? I really don't know. But it's crazy, man. There's, they call this America First, but I'll tell you a little story a lot of people don't know about Donald Trump and America First. Is he really got that slogan from David Sanger, the evil Israeli spy at the New York Times, who interviewed Trump in 2015 or 16 in the first campaign. And he said, so would you say that your foreign policy is one of America First? And what David Sanger meant by that was he thought that would hurt Trump because America First was the movement against America joining World War II. And in the common government school narrative of the thing, they were all forever disgraced. When Pearl Harbor proved that we should have declared war on Hitler back in 1937 or something, I don't know. But anyway, and then their leader, Charles Lindbergh, the great aviator, also made the mistake of railing against, quote unquote, the Jews in a speech that he gave in Missouri, and I guess a couple other statements that he gave that then gave kind of the taint of anti-Semitism to the whole thing. And so it's supposed to be, Donald Trump being naive and accepting this phrase and saying, yeah, that sounds good to me. But it was supposed to diminish him. It was supposed to tarnish him. That like, haha, look, Donald Trump is calling himself America first, but everybody knows that's horrible and bad, like Charles Lindbergh. But the joke is that, yeah, that's what they all think in the writer's room at the New York Times. But out here in the country, nobody even knows who Charles Lindbergh, the great aviator, was because they all went to government school. Much less do they know about the America First Committee and their valiant efforts to prevent America from joining World War II before FDR's treason at Pearl Harbor. They don't know about any of that, right? Only like very highly educated people know even that narrative. And so when Trump said, America first, sounds good to me. Thanks for the slogan, Mr. Sanger. The American people were like, yeah, that sounds great. America first. I mean, this is America after all. And he's running for president of the United States of America, right? So what are we supposed to be? Israel instead? Or America first, obviously. But that's the joke, though, then, is Trump never meant it. He just took something that was supposed to be sabotage that just fell flat and liked it because it was a slogan. But you know what? I bet Donald Trump doesn't even know who Charles Lindbergh is, or he couldn't describe him to you in like more than 15 words or something. I don't know anything about the America First Committee or and it wasn't just Lindbergh. It was a wide array of American leaders from across the political spectrum that were part, including the Kennedys, that were part of the America First Committee trying to keep us out of that war. And they did, as Justin Raimondo wrote, they fought the good fight. But Trump doesn't know that, and he's not hearkening back to that legacy. He's just hearkening back to this stupid slogan that David Sanger, the would-be saboteur, handed him. And that's all it ever meant to him, was vote Trump. Doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I've been rather disappointed in Trump, and I voted for him, of course, and not that we had many options. But I mean, there's, for one, the most alarming to me, and of course, we're seeing this so much in the zeitgeist on, I'll call it the right, or just people in general, the Zionist, more or less occupation of the U.S. And, I know you mentioned, just to deviate for a quick moment, you mentioned, we were talking about, you're referencing Venezuela earlier, and I had heard a commentator reference, I'd like to hear your thoughts about Maduro was lambasting Zionism, and that is another, casus belli, or a reason to kind of overthrow him and do a regime change. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent, so if you want to chime in, feel free. But yeah, there's just been a myriad of things that are just alarming. And again, I see both parties as being part of the it's like a two-headed snake almost.
It always has been for a very long time. In the case of Maduro's anti-Zionism, is a huge public relations mistake on his part at the very least. And is that part of the argument by Marco Rubio to Donald Trump that, like, Mr. President, this guy hates Israel and hates Jews, and he's a horrible guy, and he supports Hezbollah or whatever the Israeli narrative? I'm sure that plays a part in it. Just like, Saddam Hussein's support for Hamas and payments. See, here's how it worked. Saddam would give a payment. Saddam Hussein, dictator of Iraq, formerly U.S.-backed dictator of Iraq, he would give payments to the families of any Palestinians who were killed in the Intifada with Israel. And that meant any little old lady who got bulldozed in her home, her family would get a payment. But that also meant the family of a suicide bomber. He died in the thing, so his family gets a payment too. Well, obviously from the Hawks' point of view, and I mean, quite honestly, who could blame him, right? That's essentially, he's paying directly bounties for Hamas suicide bombers to kill Israeli Jews with. So this was a huge motive for the neoconservatives in America to help push us into war with Iraq, even though they did not lean very heavily on that argument to the American people, because suicide bombers in Tel Aviv is really bad, but that's an Israeli problem. That's not enough of a reason for the American people to support an invasion of Iraq. They had to threaten that Saddam was going to give Osama chemical weapons to use against your mama in order to get that war going. They couldn't tell you what it was really about. I think it's probably to a great degree, you're onto something there, that, this is part of it. But I think overall, there's this really great writer. I'll recommend him to you and your audience. He writes for me at the Institute, and he also has his own blog on Substack. His name is Brad Pierce. He's the Wayward Rabbler. And he wrote this thing about essentially the Florida man mafia has taken over the Trump administration. And that's essentially what it is. The Cuban lobby and more the Venezuelan lobby, but especially the Cuban lobby in Florida. They are hardcore. They're right wing, and they hold the fate of Republicans in that state and the presidency in the balance with all those electoral college votes and all that. And they know it. And they hate Cuba and they hate Venezuela because they're commies. After all, there's plenty to hate there. But these people are expats. It's just like the Iraqi expatriates who hated Saddam Hussein. They didn't hate their country. They hated the rulers. And they thought, well, guess what? If we can get the American neoconservatives to believe that it'll be good for Israel, then we can get America to get rid of Saddam for us. And, Ahmed Chalabi, who was the lead exile, who helped, one, just push for the regime change, but two, he and his friends were the ones who supplied much of the lies about the weapons of mass destruction, including the mobile biological weapons labs and the warehouses full of sarin and anthrax and VX and the supposed, components of nuclear facilities across Iraq and all this stuff. That came from Ahmed Chalabi and the INC. And he was confronted after the war by the London Telegraph, and they said to him, hey, man, you made all these claims and none of them came true. And he said, well, we're heroes in error. Like, whatever. I got you to do my dirty work for me. So what do I care if all your soldiers are dying and a bunch of Sunnis are dying and the whole country's going to hell? I got what I wanted. And, even in Machiavelli, in The Prince, he warns against the influence of the exiles. Do not listen to foreign exiles telling you how great it's going to be if you go intervene in their home country. Because one, they'll just lie to you no matter what to get what they want. But two, they will also believe insane things that they need to believe to continue to push the lie. Like, don't worry, me and all my friends will be welcome to be the new rulers of Iraq, which, for example, in the case of Ahmed Chalabi, never happened. He got a job at the oil ministry, but he was never the dictator. He was never going to be allowed to be the dictator. He was too close to the Americans and the Israelis for that. And the local Shiite rulers, decided on that. So, in other words, why would anyone think that Marco Rubio knows what we should do to Venezuela in order to achieve a positive outcome for that country and for American interests? We're going to put in people in there who are just such free market capitalists and wonderful freedom-oriented people that they're going to build up such a huge economy that all the Venezuelan immigrants and refugees are all going to go flying home. It's just going to be great after the war, which will take, we don't know how long. And, this and that. Another Iraq analogy. At the very start of the Iraq War in March 2003, they tried to kill Saddam Hussein. I think it was called the Doha Farm. And they killed a bunch of women and children, but they did not get him. And they didn't get him for another year and a half. It wasn't until the fall of 2004 that they finally tracked him down to a farm near Tikrit. And so, it's so easy to think in terms of Hollywood movies. And if you've been in the military, hell, maybe it's easy for you to think in terms of the view from an F-18 cockpit. I'll kill a son of a bitch with this thing, man. Nobody can stop me in an F-18, right? Except that there's more to life than putting firepower on targets. And for one, you can't find Saddam Hussein in an F-18, can you? That takes Marines getting blown up to bits a year and a half to get that done, right? Army soldiers too. So, despite all the think tank wonks, magic wishes, and all their kind of, optimistic scenarios about how these things might work out, there's every reason to suspect and expect the worst. to prepare for the worst and to oppose the war as though the worst is absolute. They say that, oh, yeah, that's what you said about the war in Iran and everything worked out great, but everything did not work out great. What happened was that Trump adopted Israel's definition of Iran's civilian nuclear program as a military program, or military enough that he gets to bomb it. Well, but they're not giving up their civilian program. There's no real specific reason to think that they're making nukes even now, even after the war of last June. But they are not giving up civilian enrichment, which means Trump is going back. It means Israel and America are going back to Iran. And we can bomb them again, but they're still not going to give up their nuclear program. So now we have a choice. We can go in there with boots on the ground and try to install the Shah Reza Pahlavi's son, or we can just forget it and accept enrichment, which has been the fact of the reality of the universe we live in for now 19 years. They've been enriching uranium for 19 years. They never have made weapons-grade uranium. They never made atom bombs. They have an electricity program. And we are either committed to long-term intervention in Iran or accepting essentially defeat, accepting the fact that, no, our airstrikes did not destroy their nuclear program and will not and cannot, and nothing short of getting in there and executing Shiite clerics and completely overthrowing their regime permanently will do. And who's willing to do that? Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to see every last 18-year-old American die in that thing, but I'm not.
Well, I'm completely in agreement with you, and I can attest to, while I didn't do anything remotely um, fill in the blank exciting or et cetera in the military, I can attest to some of the people that I served with or interacted with, and the mindset, right, which is there a thirst for war, right? It is a thirst for you know getting on it, and of course, as I'm sure you've heard over the years, those who receive all this training and they are never able to quote unquote see any action. There's this inner frustration dynamic that seems to exist, which is an interesting phenomena. But yeah, I think I think it's just absolutely asinine, the idea of going into Venezuela and revisiting attacking Iran. Wanted to I guess kind of get more of your take on where you see things situating more in the Middle East, and as far as Netanyahu or Israeli influence and things. And I also wanted to mention, and obviously this is a very sensitive topic, but I'm just genuinely curious. When you peruse around on X and you go on different platforms, people always mention it's the Jews, it's this and that, and I feel like that's a very binary take. People, those who hold that position take, and I'd like for you to hear my thoughts and correct me if you think I'm off. But I think what people are really referencing is a clique within the Zionist leadership that is indeed what they are referencing. Would you say that's an accurate assessment, or would you say that's off?
No, of course, that's correct. Look, I hate to say this because I'm from here too, but English is a very commie language. Okay? English almost insists that you talk all the time in terms of we and us and our and they and those people and these other people. And yet, I remember even in 6th grade in social studies going, a peoples? What the hell is that? How can you be a people? Or my brain, I object. Every last Hopi Indian was an individual. Even if you say they were a people who lived back, in Arizona 300 years ago or whatever, they're still individuals to me. I don't know. Because I'm a product of my own time, I guess. But especially when you're talking about people in terms of guilt and responsibility for immoral or criminal things, then yeah, you should be very specific. As Eric Garris says, our great leader at antiwar.com says, you've got to learn to discriminate, not against people, between people, right? So which Jews specifically are you upset about and for what? And as you already identified it in your question, the much more accurate way to address it would be Zionists. because Zionism is not exclusively a Jewish phenomenon at all. And it is absolutely one of the very worst things about the way our national government, especially, operates in this country right now. It's a massive problem that must be addressed. But, you know, I'm sure a lot of people in their frustration are sincere in the way that they come at this, but it's just, to me, just irrational. It doesn't make any sense on the face of it, um, to categorize it that way, and it's hugely counterproductive. Um, I consider it to be essentially all this anti-Semitism. I consider it to be de facto COINTELPRO, right? Like, for example, why do they hate Tucker Carlson so much? It's so clear. They hate him because he is not an anti-Semite. And he's right when he says, I think they're trying to get me to be one. They're trying to get me to say something mean, but I'm not gonna, because he didn't feel that way. But you see, what would happen if Tucker came out in his frustration and said something, something, the Jews, something, something? They would all go, ah, ha. And then people who thought on the margin, who thought, you know what? Nah, Tucker's a good guy, man. He's not just preaching hate. He's preaching the value of the human life of Israel's poor victims here. That's all. He's not, condemning them for their Jewishness in any real way or whatever. All those people go, wow, okay, I guess they were right about him after all, right? It would be sabotage for him to do that, right? And so I look at that the same way. I put out a tweet where I say, boy, what Israel's doing is wrong today. And then 10 replies say the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, and make it sort of seem like this is all one conversation together and that we're basically in agreement on this. And it essentially serves to delegitimize what we're doing. And for all I know, a lot of those really are Israeli bots, where on one hand, they harass you and go, you hate Jews. And on the other hand, they go, yeah, I agree with you. We hate Jews. And it's sabotage, right? Whether, literally or de facto, de jure or de facto, right? It's sabotage against people who are just trying to stick up for the Palestinians. And I would have you and your audience take note of the fact, as you already know, but maybe you never thought about this. I don't know. Maybe y'all did already. But anyone who actually hates Jews, as you were saying in your question, anyone who actually hates Jews, they will tell you that, and they will try to get you to agree with that, right? Nobody secretly hates Jews and then goes around pretending to care about the Palestinians as just like a way to attack Jews, because you can attack Israel without saying the J word, and that's how, like, their secret escape route way to attack. I mean, I've seen this argument so many times from Zionists, but that just doesn't make any sense on the face of it. Just think about it for one moment. Anybody who is legitimately racist, anti-Semitic against Jews is going to be at least as racist and anti-Semitic against Arabs, and especially Arab Muslims, right? The Jews are whiter than them. The Jews are the Israeli Jews. Oh, there I go. The Israeli Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, are European heritage. They speak English. Many of them are from New York and New Jersey, settlers on the West Bank. You know what I mean? We got a lot more in common with them. If you got to choose, if somebody's already an actual racist, then they'll say bad things about Jews, but they don't pretend to stick up for the Palestinians because they truly don't care about Palestinians. And in fact, you can see anti-Semitic people on the internet mocking right-wingers who do care about the Palestinians for not being racist enough. That, like, why oppose Israel? Obviously, you must oppose Israel because you hate Jews just like me. So why are you sticking up for these stupid Palestinians? Don't you know they're Arabs? Don't you know they're Muslims? So there's your distinction and your difference, right? You have people who complain about the actual sins of the nation state of Israel and its political leaders and the Zionist movement in the United States, Jew and Gentile alike. And then you have people who are anti-Semites. And if you're being honest, you'll never confuse the two. It's ridiculous. There's just no comparison. It's entirely different subject matter.
Yeah, I just thought I'd ask you because, again, as you, well, I mean, anyone who goes on X and you try and understand, what's going on, you hear these different, different sides of the aisle, the rhetoric, and I just think it's, it's erroneous for people to just completely, in this binary way, fill in the blank. But yeah, and so, I'll oh yeah.
just people in America. There are millions of American Jews who have no politics at all. Or if they do, like, they don't care about Israel any more than their next door neighbor does. Or if they do, doesn't mean they approve of what the Israeli regime is doing at any given time whatsoever. There's no reason in the world why American Jews should feel hated for something that they have nothing to do with whatsoever. That would be criminal in its own way, you know? And of course, then that's the false accusation, because Zionists, they don't have a leg to stand on except false accusations of anti-Jewish hatred, which then really helps to reinforce anxiety and real fear on the part of American Jews who actually are not in danger. And in fact, that's actually not the motivation of the people who are criticizing the state of Israel at all. And many of them understand that, but many of them don't. And for people who would say, oh, well, you know, that this is all rooted in anti-Semitism, you have to ask yourself, seriously, honestly, like, even if you're just somebody's grandma and you just raised this way, you just believe this way your whole life, just ask yourself for one moment, how come so many American Jews are opposed to Israel and what it's doing? They're not anti-Semites. They're not self-hating Jews. They just believe in humanity. They don't think it's okay to kill somebody and steal their stuff. This is like barbarian activity. This is the kind of thing that we have outlawed in the world: aggressive war and conquest and moving your civilian population into other people's territories. You know, I learned this in school. Hitler ruined it for everybody. No more aggressive wars and land confiscation anymore. And the whole damn world, at essentially American gunpoint, signed up for the UN Charter that says we don't do that anymore. You can't do that. And the Israelis are clearly just, and it's a matter of moral law too, of course. But we're not doing might makes right. So what they're doing is a crime, pure and simple. Occupying people, cleansing them from their land, and confiscating their land, killing them and confiscating their land.
Yeah, I watched a documentary that I'm sure you saw it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. It was called Occupied, and I've seen some of the other clips, and you can't help but be fundamentally moved by it. And yeah, it is very disturbing. And I guess as it relates to the Israeli government and such, and we're hearing about Bondi Beach and the tragic incident that occurred there. You know, I've heard on one side of the aisle, some have said this is a, false flag event, that there are that not, I don't want to say actors, but there are yeah, I guess individuals involved trying to foment and stir the pot and galvanize um, support for the Zionists, and then on the other hand, you hear another. I mean, could you provide your own kind of rendering of that?
And look, I mean, you can't rule anything out. And I admit that I have my own biases in this. Every time something like this happens, I'm confirmed in how right I am. Just like for all the truthers, they're always confirmed that everything is always a false flag. And for the hawks, they're always confirmed that everything is driven by Muhammad, who is an agent of Satan and makes Muslims attack good, true, and beautiful things, because they like to believe that. My theory, which seems to be pretty well substantiated, is that this is all blowback. And the CIA coined that term. It was a CIA historian named Donald Wilbur, in an after-action report after the Iran coup of 1953, said all officers and agents must be aware of the danger of blowback coming down the line from activities like this. And then guess what? 26 years later, there was the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis and the Iran-Iraq war, and blowback like hell from the coup of 53, right? We're still dealing with the consequences of the coup of 53. That was when they coined the term. And the term came to mean, among CIA analysts and officers, not just consequences, but long-term consequences of secret foreign policies, so that when they come due, the American people really don't know what's going on and are susceptible to false explanations of what's happening. So, now Israel's war in Gaza is not exactly covert action or anything like that, but it is among certain sectors of the American media, consumer population, is a very uncovered thing. I know people who they watch PBS nightly news hour. Used to be the McNeil Lehrer News Hour back in the day. And they'll do 2 years straight of coverage of October 7th without ever hardly covering what's going on in Gaza at all. They'll just totally skew that coverage so badly. So for people who are captives of certain media, they really have no idea why something like this would happen. For the rest of us, it's pretty hard to ignore that we've been at war over there for 25 years, as everybody knows at Israel's behest a lot of the time, like when Bush invaded Iraq, like when Obama built the caliphate. And it was actually against Israel's wishes that he destroyed it again back in 2014 and 15, 16. And everybody knows that Israel just dishes out unmitigated violence against the Palestinian people. And so then should we be surprised that some bin Ladenite kook and his son in Australia take the opportunity to get revenge against innocent Jews who they actually can reach out and touch at rifle range when they have no way of going to Israel or doing anything there? They can join up the fight where they are. And so they do. And that's how it's been this whole time. You know, the first real al-Qaeda attack in America was sort of proto-al-Qaeda, because al-Qaeda was a merger, basically, of the Saudi Azam group and Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Okay, well, the first sort of proto-al-Qaeda attack by Egyptian Islamic Jihad in America was in 1990. They murdered an Israeli rabbi named Rabbi Kahane, who was the Supreme Court of Israel outlawed his Koch party as being fascist and kicked him out of the country. And why? Because his policy was we got to ethnically cleanse all the Palestinians out of here at bomb and bayonet point till they're all gone. All this land belongs to us and they can all go to hell. And he was deemed a fascist and kicked out of politics by the Israeli Supreme Court back in the 1970s and 80s. Anyway, that was the first attack on American soil in the new era of al-Qaeda terrorism in 1990. And then when Ramzi Youssef cooked the bomb for the first World Trade Center attack in 1993, he emailed all the New York newspapers. Wrote letters to all the New York newspapers saying that this was revenge for American support for Palestine, for Israel's, occupation of Palestine and murder of the Palestinian people. It was the same thing in Osama's declaration of war against America in 1996, where he said, he criticized American support for Israel, which had invaded Lebanon again in Operation Grapes of Wrath and had bombed. It was actually, get this, tuck this in your pocket for your later trivial pursuit. It was actually an artillery officer named Naftali Bennett, the future prime minister of Israel, and probably still our future prime minister of Israel again one day. He was the artillery officer who called in a strike on a UN shelter and killed 106 women and children. And bin Laden went off about that in his declaration of war against America in 1996. And Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker of September 11th, read that and said, I'm joining up with this guy. So you got Egyptian engineering students studying in Hamburg, Germany, go to join up to serve a Saudi sheikh to kill American civilians as revenge for what Israel's doing in Lebanon. That's what the war on terrorism has always been about. That's what the terrorist war on us has always been about. Remember, earlier this year, a guy murdered 2 people out in front of the Israeli consulate in Washington, D.C. And then just a few weeks later, a guy did a Molotov cocktail and homemade flamethrower attack on a pro-Israel rally in Boulder, Colorado, and killed a lady. And I don't really know about New Orleans on New Year's Day last year, but I believe that had to have been in part motivated by American support for Israel. You know, the guy blew up the Tesla at the Trump Tower in Las Vegas at the same time, and he wrote that weird email to Sean Ryan that was full of a bunch of BS anyway. But that totally distracted from what happened in New Orleans, where the guy drove his truck straight down Bourbon Street at 2 a.m. or whatever it was. I believe he killed 24 people. And it was only a stroke of luck that when he finally crashed, he crashed right in front of a bunch of cops. He got out shooting and then they blew him away. But if he had just had 1 or 2 friends with him, if he had not crashed but stopped deliberately and got out on the other side of his truck with the truck for cover from the cops or whatever, you could imagine that thing. If he had explosives with him, if those cops had just been a couple of blocks away, that could have been so much worse. And it already was absolutely horrific. And America, let's face it, It's just lousy with soft targets, right? You're a boy. You've been around. You can imagine ways to inflict casualties on massive numbers of people at a ball game, on a freeway, in an airport, or wherever. Anyone can imagine how someone could inflict massive casualties on American civilians. The only security from that is to abandon the empire, to stop provoking these blowback terrorist attacks against the American people. As Garrett Garrett wrote back in the 1950s, he said, if it's security you want, there is no security at the top of the world. That's what this is all about. That's what it's always been about. That's why George Bush, he lied right to your dad's face. Oh, they hate us because we're free. They hate us because we're free. Oh, man, that ought to really make your blood boil now. They hate us because it's okay for Americans to go to mosque and pray 5 times a day. That's what the Bin Ladenites hate about us. That this supermajority Christian society has such a commitment to freedom of religion that we have thousands of mosques all across the country, a population of what, like 3 million Muslims who are not oppressed, other than, John Ashcroft's roundup of innocent people right after September 11th. But otherwise, they're treated just the same as everybody else. They're allowed to go to their place of worship whenever they want. Oh, that's what Bin Laden hates about us, huh? That we love our mama and that we got white skin and that we woke up in the morning and put jam on our toast. Oh, boy, I guess you can't do nothing about an implacable, irrational, religious zealot enemy like that than to just kill them all. When, nuh-uh, that's not it. Everybody already knows. See, even at the time, everybody already knew. But Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan backed these terrorists in Afghanistan. That's what Rambo 3 is about. And everybody knew that they'd been attacking us throughout the Bill Clinton years, just as they knew that Bill Clinton had been bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia for 8 years straight, picking up where George Bush Sr. left off. We all knew that. In 2007, when Ron Paul got in the big fight with Rudy Giuliani, and he said, come on September 11th, we had been bombing Iraq for 10 years before that. And the audience in the crowd booed, but the audience at home went, wait, I remember that. On my first radio show, Say It Ain't So, that I started on Free Radio Austin in 1998, I called him the Mad Bomber. Bill Clinton, the Mad Bomber, whose lust for blood is never satiated, who drops bombs on Iraqis every other day on average, according to the New York Times. People remember that as peacetime, like all the 1990s was one big Seinfeld episode or something like that. But no, actually stop and think about it. America, Britain, and Saudi supported these terrorists, and then they also supported unmitigated violence against their co-religionists in various places, including, again, bombing Iraq from Saudi Arabia and supporting Israel's unmitigated violence against the Palestinians and the Lebanese all through the 1990s. That was the motivation for Al-Qaeda's war against us. That's obviously the motive for the attack on the beach the other day. And then all Netanyahu can say, this ought to sound just pathetic. This ought to just sound ridiculous in your ears. He goes, well, this is just anti-Semitism. I mean, look, obviously this guy, again, killed innocent people because they were Jewish. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it was a political attack. It wasn't just based on like some irrational ancient cultural hatred of Jews. It's what Israel has been doing to people, exploding them to death in the high tens of thousands for 2 years straight. That's what it's about. And just like when we discuss this on Twitter, they want to hide behind, oh, you just hate Jews. And then even when it's a massive terrorist attack, they just want to hide behind that. But look, if people are interested in American and Israeli security, then the actual prescription for our problem here is to call off our terror wars. It's our governments that have gotten us into this mess. And I saw a guy, and I know how people are. I get it. I feel the sentiment. Like, oh yeah, just let the terrorists tell us what to do. Yeah, no, but you're not supposed to be running a world empire anyway. America's not supposed to be. Imagine, just think about this. You got a globe. The middle part of North America is the dominant power in the Middle East. That's stupid and wrong. And George Washington said so. No greater authority, no lesser authority than him. So, and a hell of a lot of other good people as well. So it's not giving in to the ghost of bin Laden to stop doing what we're not supposed to be doing anyway. And then let the Israelis kill people on their own dime and with their own, their own government's guilt and responsibility and without ours. People, I think, just have their head in the sand about what a moral stain Israel is on the United States of America. It is absolutely the worst thing about the United States of America right now. It's essentially the moral equivalent as if we still had slavery in Alabama. Well, we got this one state where we still have chattel slavery, and it's up to a property owner to decide whether he wants to beat a guy to death or rape his wife and sell her baby and what. Huh? No, we would not tolerate that. And I'm not even talking Jim Crow. I'm talking pre 1863, Alabama, pre 61 Alabama chattel slavery. That's the moral equivalent of America's support for Israel now. It's the most barbarian government anyway. I can't comment on their whole society, but the way their government treats their captive Palestinian population is the most barbaric thing in the world since Mao. It's just the ugliest damn thing. Benjamin Netanyahu is the moral equivalent of Saddam Hussein, and at the height of his powers when Ronald Reagan was selling him chemical weapons to use against his own Kurdish population and the rest. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu is absolutely a criminal in the highest degree. He's guilty of genocide and crimes against humanity in the very worst way. And Joe Biden and Donald Trump has supported him in it. And, Trump has got his so-called deal. It's not working very well yet. We'll see how it goes. But they're still killing Palestinians every day over there. A guy commented on Twitter. He says, the massacre where 12 or 15 people are killed on a beach in Australia, it stops everything. It's an absolute atrocity. It's horrible. It's a terrorist attack of the worst kind. But when Israel kills 12 or 15 people every day in Gaza, we call it a ceasefire. It really reminds me of the moral relativism of General Westmoreland in that great documentary, American Holocaust, about Vietnam, where General Westmoreland says life is cheap in the Orient, and they just don't care about each other's. They don't value each other's lives the way that we do. And he's just writing himself a blank check and saying it's okay to kill as many Vietnamese people as you want. They don't really grieve their dead the way the Western man does or whatever. And that's what they're saying. But of course, that's not true about the way the Vietnamese see their own dead. That's just the American view of Vietnamese life. It's the same thing here. To the Israelis, Palestinian life, they call them grasshoppers. Get it right? They're not even goats or pigs, right? They're not even livestock. They're insects, right? This is the way the German Nazis talked about European Jews. The absolute dehumanization. And then the point of those kind of terms, as we all understand, is to, in the perpetrator's mind, to dehumanize their victims to make it easier to kill them. That's why they called the Vietnamese gooks. Because if you're killing human men, women, and children, then Jesus might send you to hell for this. But if they're just a bunch of slants, then you can do whatever you want. You just got to come up with a gimmick. You got to come up with a trademark. Call them the Goyim. And now you can murder their babies and steal their property. And that's how they do it. It's really sick. It is really sick. It's the worst thing about the United States of America. And without the Israelis, without the Zionist war party in Washington, D.C., our country would be so much better in so many ways. We could have abandoned the empire a long time ago. We could have normalized relations with Iran a long time ago. We could have just, as Donald Trump said, unscripted, when he was first sworn in last January at the start of his second term, one of those marathon press conferences in the Oval Office, he talked about, we don't have to pivot from the Middle East to Russia and China and have great power competition. We don't have to fight with anyone. Let's just get along and make money at peace for the rest of the century. Man, yeah, that. See, that's not crazy talk. That's what's right. The rest of this is all what's wrong, man. It's like, you ever see Back to the Future 2?
Sadly, I have not.
Okay, well, you're too young. There's a part in Back to the Future 2, which the parts of your audience will remember, where Doc Brown explains on his white paper that when Marty went back in time, spoilers, okay? When Marty went back in time to 1955, Biff got the copy of the Sports Almanac and he made a bunch of money. And so now he says it's a skew to a tangent to another timeline where everything is all screwed up. This isn't the real 1980s. This is the bad, worse, wrong 1980s where Biff Tannen is the president. And so, which Biff Tannen was actually, I think, originally an analog for Donald Trump, like in politics in the first place, if you ever watch Back to the Future. But so that's us now, right? We're on a skew to a tangent to a bunch of stuff where it ain't supposed to be like this. You know, if you went to government school, they teach you, look, Harry Truman had to nuke the Japanese. And the proof of that is that he did it. And he wouldn't have done it if he didn't have to. And the democracy chose him, sort of, after all. And the American people, obviously, being free and with the best information they could, they voted with their democracy to choose the best men, to choose the best policies, to do the right things. And it's also literally in your own mind's eye, right? Black and white. It's from before you were born. Everything that happened before you were born, it seems so written in stone. It's hey, what's true is what's true. But why did it have to be that way? That's the bias that they build into all of this. Is it like, well, you're a fifth grader learning this stuff. You think you know better than Harry Truman? No, his name is Truman, after all. And when he left the White House, he went home to his little old farmhouse in Missouri. What a decent and genuine and wonderful guy. And so you can't second guess that. All these things that happened, they had to be this way. Well, that's a bunch of crap. That's not true at all. All these things that happen are decisions that men made, and they could have gone the other way. Sometimes they've been for better, sometimes they've been for worse, but mostly for worse. And I think anybody could see it, man. If you just pretend you're not from here for a minute, just imagine, even like you're just Canadian and you're just watching this like unfold to your south and watching all this sort of play out from just one step removed. Just imagine how insane our society looks from here, that we just won't stop this. What do you mean we're invading Venezuela? Like, what? I mean, even I know I sound crazy warning against it, where it's like, I'm half terrified this is going to happen. I'm terrified that you're going to think I'm a kook for even worrying about it, because it seems so impossible and so unnecessary that how could it be that we would go that far? And I don't know how to split that difference. I got to warn against it as hard as I can, because I think there's a very real possibility, but it is insane. And it's not supposed to be this way, you know, and it's not a big conspiracy either, where there's some ruling committee in charge of it all. I think that's, in a way, maybe we'd be better off if there was some final like skull and bones board of directors where the patriarch committee decides, whoa, we're not going that far. But what it is I think nobody's in charge. And, you know, essentially the post World War II empire just became this massive machine, and where all of Washington, D.C. is this imperial court. The Saudis and the Brits and the Israelis have a hell of a lot more pull than the American people do. And we're just all along for the ride, you know, and to our great detriment.
Yeah, oh gosh, there were several things that you covered that I wanted to touch on. You know, as far as the cost of war goes, I mentioned on another episode a while back, for those in the audience who heard that one. But I've got a neighbor actually who lives about a mile from me, and she lost both her sons in Iraq, um, and the third one was recalled. And and so actually where I'm at, there have been a lot of people who have been killed during you know, Iraq and Afghanistan. And yeah, I think it you know, I think Larry Johnson mentioned, look, it could be like another Vietnam over there. And the great Doomberg, I don't know if you're familiar with him or follow his work on Substack. He's really big in finance, very popular. He's the green chicken. And whenever I have him on, people are like, why do you have this guy on? Well, he's anonymous, but he's huge. I check him out. But he mentioned that, and I thought this was great. He said, you know, for the military industrial complex, when there's no conflict going on, that's a working capital problem, and you know, they need to do that. And then in light of time, because I know you have to head out here before long, if you can provide your thoughts on your latest thoughts on Europe, or any other things that you feel are not receiving enough attention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the war in Ukraine grinds on. Trump promised to end it, and he was sincere in wanting to end it, but people should understand, and I'm sticking up for the guy here a little bit. He wanted to end it, but he can't. And the reason that he can't is because the Russians are winning slowly, and they don't want to stop. And the Ukrainians are losing slowly, and they don't want to quit. They're not going to turn around and leave the field. I mean, hell, 250,000 deserters kind of puts the light of that, but at least the officers and the sufficiently conscripted, they're not turning and fleeing the field. I mean, it's amazing that we are having this conversation in December of 2025 about how the Ukrainians are still out there fighting and resisting the Russian invasion. And now the Russians are fighting a war of attrition, and they're moving very slowly. And so I don't think they're necessarily disappointed or behind their timeline. They've just decided that it's going to take as long as it takes, and they don't give a care. So, so then Trump comes in and says, Russia, I want you to just stop now instead of taking more territory, or maybe convince the Ukrainians to leave what they still control of Donetsk. But then Russia, you stop where you're at in Zaporozhye and Kherson. Nah, they don't want to. One, the Ukrainians are not going to turn around and leave the territory that the Russians claim, but the Ukrainians still stand on. And two, I think one, sorry for all the counting.
No.
Trump would have to offer them a massive deal in terms of the total end of the sanctions regime, a total reopening of relations between the United States and Russia, and brand new massive economic projects, and get back in all the old treaties and sign 2 new ones, and just make best of goddamn friends where just no one can undo it. And he just can't do that, right? He just doesn't have the political capital to just bring Putin to Washington and take him to a ball game and sign a bunch of treaties and do a bunch of oversee a new agreement between Exxon and the Russian state to develop Siberian resources or whatever magic, huge, magic wish, I guess, I mean to say, level concessions that would have to be made for Putin to say, okay, fine. I'll give up some of my goals in Ukraine if you'll give me all this. Trump can't give him that much, right? And then, geez, I forgot what I was counting in my head, what the other points were. But point being that, and then he would not be able to count on the next presidency from keeping any deal. The consensus in Washington, D.C. is still exactly what Joe Biden thinks. They do not agree with Donald Trump, and they don't give a damn that he won an election 3 times, quite frankly, based on the claim that he wanted to get along with the Russians. And they don't care about that. They don't care. Oh, democracy. We have to defend democracy, from the American people who have chosen that they would prefer to get along with Russia. And so the day that Trump is gone, I don't even know about J.D. Vance. I think he's probably, better than most on this. But anyone else in Washington, they're going to go right back to the worst kind of policies. And then the Europeans, I really don't know why the British, the French, and the Germans are so determined to keep this war going for this much longer. It may be just because, politically speaking, they have stuck their neck out so far in, claiming that they're determined to help Ukraine somehow win when they can't. And perhaps they've even convinced themselves that Putin really is coming for them next, which I think is just completely crazy. He has been very against NATO expansion in the Baltics and in Finland and Sweden, of course. He hasn't threatened war over those, although, the Baltics, that was back in 2004 when he was really trying very hard to get along with W. Bush. So he took that one on the chin as best he could back then. But the thing is about Ukraine was they had an ongoing, horrible border dispute, a 7-year civil war where something like 14,000 people had been killed. this massive ethnic Russian population inside Ukrainian borders that the Moscow state is somewhat bound to protect by their own theory of power, and following Bill Clinton's precedent in Kosovo, W. Bush's precedent in Iraq, and Barack Obama's precedent in Libya, Putin declared he can break the law and do whatever he wants and go in there and protect those people from the onslaught. There was a very real, very high tension, very bloody, very ugly, ongoing crisis in Ukraine, which is not the same in the Baltic states. And, they say that there's this one city called Nesta, I believe it is. I got to memorize this, man. I'm almost positive it's Nesta in eastern Estonia, which is like very much a Russian city populated by Russians and for a very long time was controlled by the Russian Empire and whatever. And then, so the question is, will Putin take that city? Will he send in the military and take that city? And the answer is, well, he hasn't yet. In 25 years in power, he hasn't. Although he has warned the Estonian government from time to time that you better treat those people fairly, but then they have. And the people of Eastern Estonia are free. And there's no threat to their lives and their liberty and their dignity. Certainly nothing like the absolute catastrophe that was an ongoing crisis in Eastern Ukraine, as well as, now that I think about it, I guess I really don't know for sure. Maybe I need to go back and look at this. Maybe I need to ask Larry Johnson about this. But it seems possible that Putin had gotten an assurance that of some meaningful type that the Americans would not put these dual-use missile launchers in the Baltic states. They haven't. They have made permanent bases there. And when the Poles said that they wanted America to station nuclear weapons in their country, Biden told them to shut up. I think Trump encouraged them, but never did it. So I just think, as I state the case in the book, all these claims about Vladimir Putin wanting to completely break his own bank, trying to reconquer Eastern Europe and recreate the Soviet Union or the old Russian Empire or whatever, there's no real reason to believe that. That's why they have to always quote him out of context, take some tiny little sliver of what he said and change the meaning of it to make it sound like, he's announcing a new policy of conquest and see in Berlin or whatever. It's just not true. So I don't know enough about national government politics on the different levels in France, Germany, and Britain and Poland. But I think much of it has to do with, what us libertarians call public choice theory, which is that the individual politicians in charge, they have all their various incentives for keeping up the charade, even, at their country's expense, because that's what's good for them politically. This is something that I can see people get upset at me sometimes for saying this because it almost sounds like a limited hangout, like I'm letting them off the hook or something like that. And I can see why it's a very unsatisfactory answer. But I think a lot of the American world empire was built out of local congressmen's fear of being called weak on communism or weak on terrorism, soft on communism or terrorism. And that there's nothing. In many cases of these people and their decision-making, there's nothing more to it than that. Whatever it is, when it comes to foreign policy, I'm going to always be a hawk. That way, no one can ever blame me if anything bad goes wrong that we didn't do enough. I always said do more. That's the way a politician thinks. They don't know or care. They don't know what a Hezbollah is. You know what I mean? They don't know where Lebanon is. They know that, well, if there's a thing, I say do it. We won't let them bad guys do bad things. We're America, the good guy. We blow them up. And even if they know that ain't smart and they know that they don't know nothing about it, they know that is the smart position to take for them. I'm not sure if you're too young for this, but there's the whole legend, which is partially true, of Lyndon Johnson micromanaging the Vietnam War, poring over these giant maps in the Oval Office even, and helping the generals pick targets and forbidding them from hitting other ones and other things. And then the military then later blamed Lyndon Johnson. So see, we would have won the war if the president hadn't tied one hand behind our back and refused to let us fight the war the way that we wanted to fight it. Now, that then became a big legend. H.W. Bush, when he launched Iraq War I, he goes, hey, all I'm doing is I'm ordering go. The war is up to General Powell and General Schwarzkopf and Secretary of Defense Cheney to carry out on my orders. And you guys have permission to do the right thing out there. And that way, and he said explicitly, no one's going to accuse me of tying the military's hand behind their back like Lyndon Johnson did in Vietnam. He said that. Guess what? Donald Trump said the explicit exact same thing about when he came into power in the terror wars and he was unleashing the military against what was left of the caliphate in Western Iraq and Eastern Syria at that time. He said, no one's going to accuse me of tying the military's arm behind their back like LBJ. I say you guys do whatever is within the law and kill these bad guys dead. Devolve authority down the chain of command to the captain level if you need to. Call in strikes, kill your enemies dead, get the lawyers the hell out of here. You guys know the law, stay within it, but otherwise go for it. And in that way, it doesn't matter if he achieves anything bombing Somalia for 4 years last time or for 4 more years this time. All that matters is no one's going to say he's weak because he turned tail and ran from the terrorists in Somalia. And as long as he's protected from that, then he can keep going. So that's the public choice theory. That's the idiot politics behind it all. That rather than learning something about it and doing the right thing and taking a stand for peace and for the good of this country, they look at it what's good for themselves. Now, I'll tell you one more anecdote about that real quick is when they were voting for a war powers resolution, and this was totally due to popular pressure. There was no interest group behind this whatsoever. It was purely popular pressure by American Yemenis, as well as the Quakers and the Libertarians and others, some leftists, working together to get the war powers resolution to try to stop Trump from bombing Yemen last time around, a war that he inherited from Barack Obama. And Max Blumenthal went and interviewed a bunch of congressmen as they were coming to work out in front of the United States Capitol and said, excuse me, Congressman, talk to me about the war powers resolution today on Yemen. Can you talk to me about that? And every single one of them said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know nothing about that. I'm into taxes. I'm a tax guy. What's a Yemen? I don't know nothing about Yemen. Leave me alone. None of them knew anything about it. We'd been at war with them for 6 years at that point, 4 or 5 years at that point. And they went, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, don't you ask me questions about some Arab country over there. The answer is I vote to kill them. Nobody's going to call me weak on terrorism. Don't get me confused with some Sunni Shiite thing. What do you mean we're backing al-Qaeda against Iran's friends this time? Leave me alone. I vote for who the speaker tells me to or who the minority leader tells me to. And I mean, look, you can't really blame them, right? They're just some idiot from your neighborhood. They don't know anything. Your average congressman doesn't know anything. You know, he's not there to try to stop a war. He's there to serve some interest. That's it.
Yeah, it's rather disappointing, the whole political system. And I have, you know, like you, I wondered, well, why do we have to have all these conflicts and wars? And I think about all the technology that we've enjoyed, and how things can actually. And it sounds really woohoo, cheesy, corny, but I just kind of pondered and thought about. I was like, wow, geez, like if people stop focus so much energy on all these, trying to kill each other, and instead just found a way to just collaborate. I mean, oh my gosh, we'd be probably 1,000 years ahead in the future in technology. And it is really sad. But my mental model, Scott, as to why that is not the case, despite the enlightenment and resources and tools and this and that, is because of these various factions that I would describe it to be as. And I think some of them within these factions are, I mean, they're outright criminals. Of course, I'm not just alluding to support of the genocide in Gaza and other things, but literally like human trafficking, drugs, shadow government, alphabet agencies, and you have, in my opinion, these nefarious actors, and that is why we continue to see these things. And that's the only rational reason as to why, in 2025 we, there's a war in Europe.
You're totally right. And it's completely ridiculous. You know, I guess I need to come up with more original things to say, but I'll tell you one from a long time ago, man. There's an episode of The Family Guy, which tell me you're not too young for The Family Guy.
No, I know Family Guy.
So the baby and the dog, it's like a Halloween episode, I guess, or something. I don't know. The baby and the dog get a machine like, oh, I know you're too young for this. There was a TV show in the 90s called Sliders where they had a little thing, askew to a tangent. So they could go from dimension to dimension and things were always totally crazy and wild and whatever. Anyway, so in Family Guy, they have a sliders thing so they can go from dimension to dimension. And in one of the dimensions, like the dogs walk the people because they're the pets and what, silly stuff like that. In one of the dimensions, everything's drawn like a Disney cartoon. But then Walt Disney comes and he's a Nazi and he goes after Mort the Jew and stuff. It's really funny. But then in one of the dimensions, the baby and the dog end up in like Jetsons world, where everything is like super high tech and super clean and everybody has flying boots like George Jetson. I know you're too young for the Jetsons. But anyway.
I have heard of the Jetsons though.
Okay. Anyway, everything is like super futuristic and super clean and super rad. And then, but the idiots on the Family Guy, the way they wrote the punchline was, in this dimension, there never was religion. And so therefore, there were never wars for the last 2,000 years. And because I guess religion is only 2,000 years old. And they might have a certain one in mind. But anyway, and then because there's been no wars for 2,000 years, because there's no religion, then that's why everything in this dimension is so cool and futuristic and clean and whatever. And I just thought, man, they really dropped the ball there because that really is a great setup for the joke. But the joke, to me, it's such like an idiot low blow to just go after religious faith. Like, what are we, 8th graders here, dude? No, man. The punchline is, in this dimension, Woodrow Wilson fell off his bike and hit his head and died when he was a boy and never grew up to be the president of the United States. So America never got into World War I and never helped Britain and France completely destroy Germany and the Ottoman Empire and create Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and didn't help prolong the war long enough for Lenin and Trotsky to seize power from Kerensky in October of 17, and didn't help the Brits and the French steal all the Middle East either. And so then there never was, in this dimension, never was a Hitler, never was a Lenin, a Stalin, a Mao Zedong, or a British Empire in the Middle East, and therefore no Israel and no American world empire to fight the Cold War and prop up Israel and fight terrorism in this whole time. And so that was all they needed, was just, and they didn't need to explain it that much, but that was all they needed, was just, in this dimension, because Woodrow Wilson died, we've had 100 years of peace. We don't need 2,000. We just need 100 years of peace is what allowed us to save up the capital to have this futuristic and perfect Jetsons utopian type world where they were living. And sorry, because I explained it like shit, but if they had done the cartoon right, it would have been great. You don't need 2,000 years of capital savings. And guess what? Religion is almost always just window dressing for the causes of wars. Religion is how you get the rubes to sign up. That's not what the war's about, dummy. Sometimes it is. You look at the Israelis now, they got some real ideological kooks, motivated to try to blow up the mosque and rebuild the third temple and all this crazy stuff. So there is some of that. There, you got American ranchers paying to have genetically engineered pure red heifers bred so that they can burn their ashes and sacrifice them and blow up the mosque and rebuild the third temple and force Jesus to come back. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. That is part of it, but that's the margin. I can tell by your shaking your head like, what? As you just said, most of these wars about money. They're about robbing your mom and dad and giving their money to somebody else over there at Lockheed and Boeing, some dividend check collector who's invested in the war machine.
Yeah, I recognize the time you probably have to go here in a moment, but I'll just add to what you mentioned that I have come to look at wars as some say it's banker wars, but it's I look at it as it's the acquisition of resources and through and also a myriad of other angles, and it's just really tragic. And I also thought I'd mention, you referenced the Eastern Front earlier, and I'd done a bit of reading on that. I just thought I'd share and comment that I thought it was interesting that, okay, not only are we seeing war again over in, what was in the Eastern Front in World War II, but I would look at some of the recent literature, Scott, on concerning Russia and the Great Patriotic War, and that whole era, and how it's, and there's no mentioning of the alternative perspective. And if I recall, the Maidan coup was the event in Ukraine, right, where the overthrowing event occurred, but there's no reference point of other things. It was just completely obfuscated, and this one dimension narrative that is put out there. And I've looked at a number of scholarly sources. I had been working on a master's in history, and I look at a number of scholarly sources, and it seems it's all lockstep. And so I just thought I'd share that in terms of what we're seeing today, how Russia is depicted, the conflict over there, and yeah, how things get obfuscated.
Yeah. Look, it's very important that you do that. And I'm really glad I didn't go to college, man. Who knows how terrible I'd be on things if I had. But, I'm not sure if you saw this. It's pretty obscure, I guess. But there's a couple of Russian pranksters. They call themselves pranksters, Vovan and Lexus. And what they do is they'll impersonate President Zelensky or other officials. And then they get American or other Western officials to make the dangest admissions. And they had one very recently that was an interview with Amanda Sloat. It was like a Zoom call. It wasn't an interview. It was like a Zoom call. I'm not sure who they were pretending to be, but they were pretending to be Ukrainian officials of some kind. And they got Amanda Sloat, who was the head of Europe policy on the Biden National Security Council, on there. And they got her to admit that, yeah, if we had just disavowed NATO membership for Ukraine, we almost certainly would have prevented the war and all the violence and death that's occurred. And even if we had made the deal at Istanbul right after, instead of continuing, then she says we almost certainly would have prevented all the violence and bloodshed and everything that's happened ever since then. And the thing is, when you watch that, one, you'll know, yep, she's right. And that means my book is right. Everything I said in there's straight out of Biden's head of Europe on the NSC, saying that the thesis of my book is absolutely correct there. And also you look at her and you go, what's so impressive about this woman that she gets to help even to decide America's national security policy in Europe? And I'm not being sexist about this. You could, put a mustache on her. It's the same dang thing. None of these people are any more special than she is. But sit there and watch that Zoom call. And you'd be like, yeah, you could see why she sat at the front of the class in junior high school or whatever. She knows how to read a book and do her homework. But is she impressive, really? As like, here's someone that possesses a deep wisdom about even her own presence in time and place and what this means for the future of Europe, for the future of America and the West's relations with Russia, any of these things on any deep or meaningful level that you might try to appreciate. No, she's just some dumb broad. She's like, whoa, we didn't want to what are we going to do? Let the Russians have veto power over who joins NATO? Well, yes, in fact, as she's admitting, after their total destruction in war, that's what they're going to sign on the dotted line, or they're going to lose their capital city. They're going to not have a Ukraine at all if they won't put it in their constitution that they are never joining NATO. And if NATO won't forswear officially bringing them into our alliance. The Russians have already said they won't stand for it. So what's Amanda Sloat's program here? She doesn't have one. Let the Ukrainians die for this idiot principle. This is not a sacred principle. This is completely stupid. Well, what are you going to do? You're just going to let Russia have a say in who's allowed to join the NATO military alliance? Well, yeah. When they have avowed that they will kill them all first, then yeah. Or what? Are you going to liberate Ukraine from the Russian military occupation and conquering of their eastern provinces? No, you're not, because that would mean hydrogen bomb war and we all die. So what are we doing, right? This reminds me of me when I was a little shit in 7th grade and two dudes would be like nose to nose about to fight. And I would push the one that I don't like into the one that I do and make them fight, That's the evil of the United States of America. Go ahead and, in fact, in this case is worse. We push our friend into the bully so he can knock their dang block right off. It's nuts, man. It's nuts. And anyone could see it. It's at the Amanda Sloat. And you guys can find that on Rumble, by the way, if you want that for your show notes or whatever. Just type in Amanda Sloat and Vovon and Lexus and Rumble, and it'll come right up for you. And it's just the worst kind of face palm. It's just, remember when they first kind of came out with Zoom calls and stuff? Where now nobody has to go to the studio, even like Skype. Nobody has to really go to the TV studio to be on TV anymore. And there's nothing really surprising about this, right? I don't know. Like, I guess it depends where you grow up, but like, do you remember being like a little bit surprised to see like when very rich and famous people would be on Zoom from their house, that it looks like just another house, just like anyone else? You know what I mean? I remember like an interview of Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys. And he's just like sitting in a room in a house somewhere that's like not any more special than the way anyone else lives. You know what I mean? Even though he's like the Beastie Boy here, like at the end of the day, rooms are not special. And like these people they're not different or better or special from us at all. At all. And it's sort of like when you grow up and you realize doctors ain't necessarily that smart. Not even necessarily curious. They're doctors and they're not even smarter than you. And you're like, wait a minute, if you're a doctor, you should be smarter than me because I'm not qualified to be a doctor. But then I'm looking at you and you don't seem that sharp. You know what I mean? It's that same kind of thing with the foreign policy establishment. These guys really suck at this. They really do.
I completely agree, and I'll also add, because you're referencing credentialed people, and I look at it as, to your point, physicians and even historians, in that, right, the historians go to the archives to decipher and their rendering, their revisionist fill in the blank history of what happened, and the doctor relies on the pharmaceutical centric supported medical establishment that frowns on others, like the DO program and these other ones. And so as I have fill in the blank, you want to call it matriculator or whatever the term is, you start to wonder the archive, the control of the sources that produce these individuals, and where are their sources from, who created it, just like your book is obviously beautifully footnoted. I look at things more critically, like, who wrote it, who published it, was it university press, or was it, I mean, just different things, not that university makes it kosher or legit by any means, but yeah, just critical thinking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everybody's out to get you. You got to do what you can.
Absolutely. Well, Scott, how can people learn more about you and get in touch with you?
Okay, well, my big new project is called the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom. Just came out last month, and it's long form courses by myself and other great experts on the Middle East, on the new Cold War with Russia, on Israel-Palestine, on really all our wars since 1945, Christian Zionism, Woodrow Wilson, and just so much good stuff and more all the time. And that is scotthortonacademy.com. And we have a deal going on for Christmas. If you just use the promo code Christmas20, you get 20% off membership at the Scott Horton Academy. Otherwise, you can find me at antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute. I'm on X and YouTube and all those things at /Scott Horton Show. And I'm on Amazon, as you said, too.
Love it. Well, Scott, I appreciate you just unpacking and diving into some topics that are fascinating. And have a Merry Christmas. And looking forward to reconnecting with you here next year.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. You too.
Quick ask: over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.